All right, everyone. Thanks for coming to another at Google event. It's my pleasure to introduce today PJ Simmons. He's a good friend of mine. He's worked for over 15 years to connect sustainability issues to public foreign policy and business affairs. I've got a brief edited list of things he's done. Bear with me. He's the founder and co-founder and chairman of the Corporate Eco Forum. The members of this forum are basically a who of the global economy. Google is a member of the forum. He served as a research assistant on international environmental affairs at the National Security Council. He founded the Woodrow Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. He founded and edited Washington, D.C.'s first consumer guide to environmentally friendly businesses. He served twice as the Clinton Global Initiative Deputy Chair for Energy and Climate Change. He directed the first Clinton Global Initiative University Climate Program. PJ also, he received his BA in political science from Tufts and his MA from Johns Hopkins. He was a Fulbright scholar to the former Yugoslavia, and he holds a certificate in conservation biology from Columbia University. Outside of that and the things I left off here, PJ has done nothing else. He is also the co-author of the book, Green to Gold Business Playbook, and that's what he's here to talk to us about today. So take it away, PJ.
Thanks so much, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. When Google first invited me to come here, and I'm so grateful to be here, I instantly said yes. Of course, as Jason mentioned, Google's a member of the Corporate Eco Forum, and I know the company well, and the company's actually been a real leader in the space of sustainability innovation. But I actually subscribe to the emails that say when there's new Google Talks, and one of the first things I wanted to do was check out who had done recent Google Talks, and so of course I saw Tina Fey and Mario Batali and the two winners of American Idol, and then some guy that was talking about men's sexual health, and I thought, well, my work's cut out for me. Tough acts to follow, but I'm going to try to do my best to impart some knowledge on you, and really appreciate you coming out today. Let me just start by giving an introduction to this book and where it came about. Back in 2006, a book called Green to Gold came out that my co-author Dan Esty wrote with Andrew Winston. And at the time, it made a big impact because it really made a compelling case for why companies ought to view environmental issues and sustainability issues beyond the realm of corporate social responsibility and philanthropic issues, but really see them as core strategic issues to the future of their businesses. And it was a book of the meeting at Davos, the World Economic Summit in 2006. And it really changed a lot of minds. And it really was the sort of why. And Dan Esty called me a couple of years ago, and knowing that I had been working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and large global companies in the Corporate Eco Forum, to ask if I would be interested in working on the companion book, The How, to Green to Gold. And that's the origins of the playbook. We wanted to create something that was really practical, that really helped people across a range of different business functions. So not just the people with sustainability in their titles and the environmental green team folks, but people who do information technology for companies, people who do buildings and facilities, supply chain executives, and so forth. A quick word about the organization that Jason mentioned that Google is part of. And I should say, by the way, Jason mentioned I was deputy chair of the Clinton Global Initiative for a couple of years on energy and climate change. My co-deputy, Michael Terrell, is actually a Googler based in California. He was one of my favorite colleagues to work with. The basic idea of the Corporate Eco Forum, which we set up in 2008, is to create a safe space for very senior executives, again, not just the folks with environment in the title, but people that are doing all sorts of different things to drive successful business within companies, to kind of shut the door and sort of create a safe space for them to exchange their war stories and their success stories and trying to make green work for their companies in a way that was really profitable and led to hard business results. And it's been a really fabulous learning experience for me, and was a big part of the inputs that went into this book. But I want to sort of flash back for a few years. Many of you may have seen this ad on TV, this 30-second ad spot by IBM, where there was this skeptical CFO type, chief financial officer, sitting behind a desk. And this woman comes in, the commercial shot in black and white in the first part, and she's saying, she's presenting the business case for why the company ought to invest in some energy efficiency measures. And the guy's really skeptical, and he's basically says, this is going to be great for the tree huggers. I get it. That's a really nice thing that we want to do this, but really, from a business perspective, why should I sign this? And she then goes through all the cost savings and the millions of dollars that the company's going to save if they do it. And all of a sudden, it shifts into color, sort of like Dorothy landing in Oz, and the birds start singing and the music starts playing, and he says, where do I sign? And the remarkable thing is, since the book came out and since that commercial came out, there are so many examples of companies that have actually had that experience where somebody's gone into a skeptical CEO or CFO office and made a case for investing in something that might be higher upfront costs, but would generate some really serious payback in lots of different ways. And because of all that anecdotal evidence, and because so many people are seeing that from their peers, it's led to a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. And that really, again, is what the book is all about, is to sort of showcase a lot of those case stories and really go through the benefits of how green creates business value. And the Green to Gold framework, which back in the first book outlined 4 key benefits that we build on in this book. The first of the 4 benefits is cutting costs. And this is where most companies start on their green journey, because it's the most well understood, it's the easiest to justify to financial types and get budget for. And the idea is that green is the new lean. If you use a green lens and green principles, you're going to find new forms of waste, hidden forms of waste that are costing you precious time and resources and taking money away from your profits. And one of the biggest areas here of focus is energy waste, but we're also talking about other operational costs and inefficiencies that result in water waste, scrap waste, chemical waste, all sorts of other things that lead to regulatory burdens and all sorts of other expenses. The second big area is reducing risk. And here we're not just talking about sort of the mega risks that we're all familiar with and that we see on the news, the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico, or catastrophic chemical accidents. But we're also talking about the kind of environmentally related risks that creep up on companies and that may not be on a lot of strategic planners' minds, but ought to be, given the way that trends are shaping up around the world. One of those examples, if you're a company that is a beverage company, for example, like Coca-Cola, that relies heavily on water, it's a key input for you. The fact that world water resources, freshwater resources, are becoming more scarce is a big concern to you, not only because it's a key input to your product, but also because you might get blamed and might get a lot of exposure for being part of perpetuating the problem if you don't fix it. And that's one of the reasons why Coca-Cola is one of those companies that's actually investing in watershed restoration and protection around the world to create the system so that water actually keeps getting generated. And there's lots of other examples of that in the IT realm. For example, there's a lot of companies like Google that are using huge amounts of energy because they are information intensive and have a lot of data centers and a lot of servers. And so companies are thinking about what about the price of energy? What happens when carbon-based energy becomes more expensive? And so what does it look like to invest in other forms of energy that might not expose us so much to those changes? The third big area is growing revenues, and this is where it starts getting really interesting and where we've seen a sea change in the last couple of years in the way that big global companies start thinking about the environment, from just this compliance thing to a cost reduction thing to a risk reduction thing to actually something that might really help drive innovation, drive growth of the business, be a source of future revenues and competitiveness. DuPont, the chemical company, is an example of one that actually set a $6 billion revenue goal by 2015 for products that are built around sustainability. A lot of you are probably familiar, you've seen the ads for Eco-Imagination by GE. They have been so successful. That originally started as a marketing initiative where the company was already doing a lot of products that were really good. It delivered a lot of environmental reductions and benefits, and the CEO, Jeff Immelt, sort of pulled people together and said, how can we better communicate this stuff? How do we package this in a way that gets the message out there? So they came up with Eco-Imagination, but that ended up being so successful that it launched a whole new wave of thinking within the company and a new wave of innovation. That the revenue goals for 2012 right now for that company, for the Eco-Imagination line, are $25 billion. Huge growth area from where it was just a few years ago. And Procter & Gamble, a big consumer goods company that you're all familiar with, makes detergents and all sorts of household products. They're now looking at a revenue goal of by next year of $50 billion in sustainable product innovations That has to do anything from low compact, laundry detergent that uses less energy and less product, costs less to ship, to all sorts of different innovations there. And then the final area, which is harder to describe for a lot of people and harder for people to buy into, but it's probably one of the biggest when it comes to environment sustainability, and it has to do with brand and intangibles. And here we're talking about the benefits that aren't easily captured on traditional financial statements and accounting statements, but they're the kinds of things that are really important drivers of future earnings and of shareholder value and of stock price. We're talking about brand equity, customer satisfaction, and customer loyalty. Are people going to stay with you or shift over to the next big thing when somebody else invents it? License to operate around the world. Reduced operational burden and interference from regulators, from NGOs, less Greenpeace sort of demonstrations about what you're doing, less regulators breathing down your back, a stronger ability to attract top talent and retain top talent. And for a company like Google, that is absolutely enormous and priceless. Stronger R&D and innovation capacity within the company. How nimble, how adaptive, and how creative is the culture, and capable of actually responding, looking at trends in the world, looking at customers' needs, looking at how things are changing and adapting to that and innovating. Just a brief word about stock value. If you look at Coca-Cola, going back to Coke for a second, 20% of its market capitalization can be attributed to its book value, and its hard assets, but 80% of the value is attributed to intangibles, like how investors view the strength of its brand, its exposure to risks, its R&D capacity, and so forth. And there are companies that are smaller, like New Belgium Brewing Company, which makes some of my favorite beers, and based in Colorado, that have really experienced the people-related benefits of going green. Their CEO is really charged up about sustainability, and you see a bike in their actual logo. And they have an employee retention rate of 95%, and their motivated workforce has really propelled them to exceed the growth rate of a lot of their competitors. The industry average is about 8%. Their growth rate's been 13.5%. Another example on a much bigger scale of total brand turnaround is Walmart. This is a picture of Mike Duke addressing earlier this year a sustainability gathering of his company. That company, if you flash back to before Katrina, the Hurricane Katrina and the tragedy there, it was getting hammered by NGOs and the public left and right for being bad on social issues, being bad on environment, and so forth. And there was a kind of aha moment when the company just sort of decided from a values perspective to do the right thing with Katrina and think about how it could actually help make a big difference in alleviating suffering and in helping people. And at that time, the CEO, Lee Scott, walked away and thought to himself, and with some urging from other colleagues, what would it be like if Walmart was always at its best like this? And that, plus a lot of other personal transformations and conversations with experts that Walmart had, led to an imagining of a future where Walmart actually would be loved by people and would attract people that actually care about sustainability. But it also started looking at it from a hard business perspective of resources running out, of prices changing, of all these factors, and its license to operate around the world. And it started thinking, how could it change the way it does business? And it's been a profound transformation. And if anybody's actually interested in learning more about that, there's a great book called Force of Nature, which I just read a few weeks ago, that really is kind of a great behind-the-scenes story about that transformation. Going back to this IBM commercial, even though there's so much exciting stuff that we talk about in the playbook that I'm part of with the corporate ecoforum every day that I learn about, the reality is that the vast majority of people in business still think like the CFO behind the desk. They think of environment and sustainability as a cost center, something that's going to be a pain in the neck, an add-on to everything that they're already doing. And one of the kind of interesting indications of this, there was a survey that a big company called Forrester Research did at the end of last year, 2010, fourth quarter, and it asked something like 2,600, I think, companies, executives that had budget authority. What are your top priorities, business priorities for 2011? So you can see, at the top is growth. Company revenue is really important. Attracting and retaining customers, one of those intangibles, but a really important priority. Efficiency, lowering operating costs, improving the quality of products and processes. Innovation, again, intangible stuff, but how do you improve your ability to innovate as a company? How do you drive new market offerings and business practices? Talent, how do you acquire and retain talent? Again, an intangible, it's something not easily measured and quantified, but really important, and improve productivity. if you are wondering where environment is, it's at the bottom of the list, and it falls under, it's number 10, and it's called Improve Corporate Environmental Sustainability and Social Responsibility. I think the way that question is framed and the fact that it's a separate add-on, it's thought of in terms of responsibility and not in terms of something that actually advances every single one of those things in the growth, efficiency, innovation, and talent department, is a measure of sort of indication of where we are. And it's where things are changing. And the CEOs and the companies that are visionary are seeing the connection and the through line through all those categories and not seeing it as a standalone. And really, this is what the book is meant to sort of help people with. It's designed not for, as I say, just the Chief Sustainability Officer or the CEO, but it's not meant to be read from cover to cover, but it's meant to be a really practical guide that a CEO could hand to somebody that is the Chief Information Officer, the Chief Technology Officer, the head of R&D or supply chain, and say, hey, check out this. Have we tried these different things? Have we looked at these different plays? They seem to be paying off for other people. Would this work? And to be very clear, Dan and I in this book are very adamant that you need to, if it's going to work for you, you need to apply the same sort of business tough approach that you would for any other business decision-making issue. And not every play that we talk about in the book is going to pay off for every company. But for the companies that do apply the lens and apply the kind of principles, we sort of guarantee that you will find ways that it pays off for your business. And you'll see that these are chapters 8 through 17. I pulled them out because it sort of gives you a sense of the fact that we wrote for these different audiences and tried to start from the perspective of what is it that somebody in logistics is really going to be caring about, and how could green actually help what they're doing. As an extension, just one last word about sort of where we both think this is going and why Dan and I wanted to get this book out there to sort of accelerate the trends that we think are already underway, where green is no longer seen as a separate thing, where it's pivotal to long-term business success, and it's integrated with business activities across value chains. It's a top innovation driver. And you see there are lots and lots of surveys that support that this is the mega trend. We want to just kind of move it a little faster given what's actually happening with global environmental trends. One final word before I talk about some examples from the book. I think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is vocabulary and how we talk about these issues. And the word environment, I think, has a built-in connotation that makes people think of polar bears and spotted owls and all sorts of mega, charismatic species, and not about something that we actually connect to. And in the business context, again, it's seen as oftentimes it just activates a way of thinking that's about corporate responsibility, stewardship, values, and so forth. You see these kinds of statements in annual reports and on websites. We care about the environment as though it's something separate from us. We have a responsibility to the environment, to the planet. This is our environmental strategy as apart from our business strategy. We want to generate win-win outcomes for the business and the planet as though they're two different things. And it struck me a couple weeks ago that maybe we ought to just replace the word environment in a lot of these conversations with the word long-term. And if you do that, it actually ends up really getting to the business logic of what this is all about. It's about businesses caring about their long-term success and competitiveness, their responsibility to their long-term, to the shareholders in the long term. It's their long-term strategy, and they want to generate win-wins, not just for when they say the business, what they oftentimes mean is quarterly profits. They also want to generate win-wins for the short-term profits and for the long term. So let me just focus on the rest of the time, giving some examples from the book of some of the plays that are paying off for companies and that we talk about a lot more in the playbook. And one of the first and closest to home is the office environment. It affects virtually every company. And a great place to start is paper and printing. We've all probably been to the printer, shared printers, and seen a ton of paper that's just been left there by other people, not picked up, or we've forgotten to pick something up ourselves at the printer. There's Xerox research that says that 40% of printouts are discarded within 24 hours. We don't need, every single company, whether it's small or large, can actually get rid of a lot of paper and save a lot of money in the process. And some of the research we uncovered pointed to savings of about $1,250 per employee per year with a return on investment of 300%. Through just some really simple measures, making double-sided printing standard and helping users with software that actually makes it easier for them to make better choices. Lockheed Martin, big defense contractor, saves $250,000 a year by shifting a manual that it used to just hand out to all the employees kind of mindlessly and say, here, read this, which would just sit on a lot of desks. They put it online, and that's saving them $250,000 a year. Barclays Capital in the UK actually requires the use of a swipe card to go pick up your print jobs, and that is saving about $500,000 a year. And GE estimates that it saved about $1.6 billion over the last decade by shifting a lot of things to digital. I'm proud to say that in writing the Green to Go playbook, I didn't actually have a printer that was working. I did everything online. We used wikis, we used Google Docs, we used all sorts of collaborative techniques and PDF viewers. And the only paper was actually when the publisher sent me single-sided versions of the manuscript, which ended up, this was the last day before we sent it off to the publisher. There's a ton of things that can be done in the office environment. We go through a whole handful, from electricity use, paper, trash, water, e-waste, travel, food, and these are things that Google is operating on all cylinders in this regard too. But a big theme that we talk about, not just in the context of office environments, but also in virtually every part of the book, is engaging the talent and the ideas of people like you that are just on the front lines and know what the problems are and can figure out creatively what the solutions are. And just one great example of this that I love from Yale University, they got 13 dormitories. They created a competition, and the reward was $300 of pizza. That was the investment. And that generated tons of ideas, which ultimately led to $1 million in energy savings for Yale, just out of a $300 investment. Similarly, at Walmart, they went through several years ago, they started involving people in what they called a personal sustainability pledge or project. Now they call it My Sustainability Pledge. And they brought a lot of employees through a training where they got to think about, what does sustainability mean to me? How can I make a difference in my personal life and my job that's going to benefit me, benefit the business? And one guy was sitting in a break room, and he realized that the lights in the vending machine were on in a very well-lit room. This is not the actual room. But he basically just got this idea that this was serious waste, and it bubbled up to corporate. Walmart's saving $1 million a year just by turning off the light bulbs in its vending machines. It's just one of those simple ideas that when you start empowering people with the concepts and give them some examples, the creativity that gets unleashed is amazing. Closer to home for all of you in the area of information technology, one of the things that is making a big difference and really paying off for a lot of companies is using video conferencing and remote collaboration and telecommuting to really drive a lot of cost savings and actually make employees a lot happier. How many of you either telecommute at any point, like one day a week now, or how many of you currently do? And how many of you would like to that don't already? So for those of you that do, you can probably speak to some of the benefits there, but the research really bears out that what it does is it helps companies really cut real estate costs in a huge way. About 25% of IBM's staff telecommutes regularly, and that program saved the company $50 million. And there are a lot of studies that show that there's a boost in productivity, that people actually work, and I can attest to this too because I telecommute. You actually work more hours, in part because you're not stuck in traffic and you're not dealing with the hassles and the vagaries of weather and everything else. But this can really help with retention because there's a lot of studies that this makes people happier. And McKesson Corporation, which is in the healthcare sector, reports that the group that has the highest job satisfaction in its whole company are the 1,000 nurses that they have working from home. On a related note, video conferencing is huge and collaboration tools, and I have to just point out how much I love Google+. I'm one of the early adopters and evangelists of the technology. But here you have Google Plus Hangouts, which allows up to 10 people to communicate really quickly at a time. And this kind of innovation, is really bringing down the cost and making it affordable for virtually anybody to take advantage of these kinds of technologies and reduce a lot of travel as well, which is really costly for companies and a huge source of carbon emissions as well, which when companies start counting up their carbon emissions, travel for a lot of companies is big. So this helps on multiple fronts. And then you have solutions like Cisco Telepresence, which are also really coming down considerably in cost, and so the payback is fast, not just because because the prices are coming down, but because the massive amount of savings for travel reduction are oftentimes paying for the equipment and the investment in like 15 months or less. Moving into the area of buildings, which is an area we spend a whole chapter on, have a lot of checklists. It used to be that a lot of great opportunities in greening buildings and saving money were untapped because people just had the perception that it cost a lot more, lack of awareness about the best practice and opportunities. That's really changing as companies exchange their success stories. The costs are dramatically coming down. The upfront cost premium for a commercial green building today is only about 2% compared to a traditional building, and the time to recoup the initial investment has dropped down to an average of 3 to 4 years. The return on investment over a 20-year period on a green building now stands at 4 to 6 times the upfront cost. And green buildings are not only sort of paying back for themselves and generating a lot of operational savings and reduced energy bills over time and everything else, but they're also commanding rent premiums of about $11.33 more per square foot for LEED certified, which is one of the highest environmental rating systems that people have over traditional buildings. They also have higher resale rates. They're selling for $171 more per square foot over LEED buildings are over their conventional counterparts. One of my favorite examples of not a green building that didn't start that way but has been retrofit to become one is the Empire State Building. And I actually took this from my apartment, so it's not the clearest picture, but one of the things I love about the building is that they've transformed the idea of what lights at night look like, and just by lighting up with LED lights at the very top of the building, they've created this iconic thing that everybody loves in New York City, and of course it changes, and people go on the website and kind of look at what the different colors mean. But what they did recently was invest $20 million in retrofits to try to make the whole building much more energy efficient. They're getting a payback in 3 years for that, and they're expecting a $4.4 million annual savings by cutting energy like 38% just from that initial investment. There's so many areas again that we cover in the playbook. From plugging holes literally in doors and windows and better insulation, setting the water temperature lower, putting the air conditioning and heating at rational levels. I just went to a luxury hotel recently. I got put up there, and it was another one of those experiences where you turn on the tap, the hot water, and you almost burn yourself because it's so hot. And then you walk into the hallway, and it's like 50 degrees, and it's like the Arctic. And that's not, to me, it's not luxury, and it's just a huge amount of waste for the company that they're doing stuff like that. So we have a lot of examples and checklists in the book for things like that. Lighting is one of the big areas where one of the first areas that we encourage people to focus on. It consumes about 35% of electricity in U.S. commercial buildings. And the EPA says that we're wasting about 50% of the energy associated with lighting because of inefficient design and poor maintenance, inappropriate use. Huge payback in this area. And one of I pulled this up too because I was thinking about the incandescent light bulbs, which are often joked by engineers as being little heat engines that emit a little bit of light because they emit so much heat that somebody invented a product around them back in the 70s, the easy bake oven. But sort of newer forms of lighting drive down a lot of bills, and they also boost productivity. And one of the things that was staggering that I learned in the context of this book that a lot of folks are saying that better lighting boosts productivity and makes people happier at work. So the numbers again are controversial because how do you measure that? How much you put a price on that? But one of the things that one research did was they calculated even a 1% productivity bump from lighting. When you think about how much companies spend on employees and salaries, if you boost productivity by just 1%, which is a conservative estimate, that could actually offset, in many cases, companies' entire lighting bill for the entire energy bill for the entire year. So that can make a big difference. Another area we focus on is roofs. Painting a roof white is a really simple measure, deflects a lot of heat. Green buildings are becoming more popular for similar reasons. All of this changes the ambient temperature. It reduces the load on the AC and the heating within actual companies or buildings. And Con Edison here in New York actually installed both of these forms in its corporate headquarters recently, reducing the summer heat gains by 67%, the white roof is, and the green roof is cutting summer heat by 84%, and winter heating losses by 37%. So huge gains in the buildings area. In going back to your realm of information technology, this is an area where, the role of IT professionals, the chief information officers, is becoming big, and I think it's going to become absolutely huge and indispensable for companies that really want to seize eco advantage. And it's obviously big for just about every company because every company uses IT in one way or another. But for companies that actually are built around IT, like Google, this is a really huge area of both impact and opportunity. First of all, most companies spend a lot of money on energy because of IT. And when you get more efficient about it, you can save a huge amount of money as a result. IBM says that its clients that it helps get more efficient in this area routinely get 15 to 70% reduction in operating costs through IT efficiency initiatives, and full payback in most cases of 1 to 2 years. And these are, again, fairly simple measures. And IBM itself actually avoided $49 million in costs in building a whole new data center because it did some efficiency measures to make one of its data centers hugely more efficient and up the capacity of the data center by 8 times, so it avoided having to build a whole new building. $49 million saved from a $1 million investment in green overhaul of that data center. Second of all, the reason why IT is such a big area is because companies are going to face increasing pressure in this area to address the rising impacts associated with IT, especially in the area of greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy use, particularly data centers, but all sorts of the devices that we carry around that we plug in, and of toxics associated with electronic waste. In fact, McKinsey, the consulting firm, predicts that by 2020, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide could come from information and communications technologies and products. And of course, we've all heard about e-waste and toxics issues as being a really big problem. And then finally, and I think most interestingly, there's a potential for the IT industry and IT professionals to really transform a lot of processes and be a net solutions driver. So yes, you have all those impacts, but there's potential to actually move the industry in a way that solves so many sustainability problems that its own impacts are offset by all those contributions. And you see a lot of companies getting into this in the consulting space and in the sustainability software space. Huge just explosion of offerings that try to help companies deal with the huge amount of analytics that people are trying to now grapple with, all these sustainability metrics to try to make their companies more efficient, make their supply chains more efficient, track what's happening in Indonesia or in China with one of their suppliers. Lots of complexity in terms of information that IT professionals are jumping on the bandwagon to try to solve. We talk about a lot of different areas in the book in IT that people can make a difference on, a lot in the end user environment, efficiencies and so forth. But one of the biggest areas is data centers, obviously. And I think most of you are probably very familiar with this issue, and you know that Google is one of the world leaders in this area. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just a couple of issues to mention when it comes to data centers because it's so important. There's 2 key issues when it comes to data centers from an environmental and energy standpoint. First of all, the energy and the impacts from the equipment itself. And second of all, the energy and impacts from the buildings and the structures that actually house them, all the cooling and heating and lighting associated with that. Right now, according to the EPA and the Department of Energy in the United States, data centers represent about 1.5% of all the energy that's consumed in the United States, and that figure is likely to double in the next 5 years. Cooling is a big area where that adds up for companies and costs a lot of money. I guess about 10 years ago, about 17 cents per dollar spent on a new server went towards power and cooling, and today it's up to 48 cents. And if that number doesn't change, according to one estimate, it could go up to 78 cents. So companies are doing a lot to change this, and Google's one of the pioneers here, as I mentioned, and really helping to sort of accelerate the spread of best practices and what we call next practices, emerging practices in this area. One of the companies that is doing some really interesting things in this space too is Yahoo. The reason I bring them up is they built this data center in New York that actually draws a lot of free cooling, literally free cooling. It doesn't have to pay for it from the outside air, and they were inspired to invent this from looking at how chicken coops actually cool naturally. But again, really some of the most exciting stuff in this area has to do with the potential for IT to drive sustainability problem solving at the company level, at the regional level, the country level, and really at the global level. And I think Google Earth Engine, which was just announced recently in Cancun at the climate negotiations last December, is really one of the most stunning examples of this. I love this picture. It's of a chief of an Amazonian tribe called the Surui. And they're using Earth Engine to help measure forest carbon in their area. But this is an incredibly powerful and important monitoring platform that is going to be an invaluable tool in curbing deforestation around the world. And it was launched by .org. So a lot of you may be wondering why I'm mentioning this in sort of business-focused presentation. But again, going back to the brand impacts, first of all, I think this actually is one of those products that Google comes out with that's associated with this brand that really does drive a lot of people to feel great about the brand of Google, and it's really invaluable in that sense. But it's also, as I say, just sort of indicative of a solution to many sort of emerging needs and problems out there where IT is going to be a solution. Very quickly in the manufacturing space, the idea of green being sort of taking lean manufacturing to new heights, putting lean on steroids. It's about sort of rooting out waste in all forms and sort of identifying waste that you might not otherwise see. And one of the sort of secret weapons for anybody in green manufacturing, sort of like the pizza party at Yale, is to tap into the talent and the expertise of line employees. And one of the things that General Electric does is they have these treasure hunts that have been replicated and shared with a lot of other companies that are doing similar things now. And these are pictures from a 3-day treasure hunt in Wisconsin, where they set a goal and they called it the hunt for carbon or something. And the idea was that carbon is a symptom of waste. And so they're going to go hunt for carbon to try to find at least $700,000 in energy savings. And what the team did was they went on a weekend when normally things are shut down, and they tried to look at all the things that were sort of spinning around, or lights that were on in the bathrooms or wherever, ventilation issues, and tried to get a sense of where there was waste. And they came up with $3 million in savings just in a 3-day treasure hunt. Miller Coors is an example of a company that's actually taken some of its plants, as GM has and a lot of other companies have, to zero waste. They were generating 1.6 million pounds of trash in 2007. And some of their folks got together and said, we want to create a goal of, in 5 years, getting to zero waste. They did it in 2. Another company that makes vacuum cleaners that you may own, Bissell, uses a lot of the inputs of its product to make new products and just keeps recycling stuff and recycling it, and they call it's closed loop manufacturing. It's an idea inspired by nature, where nature doesn't waste anything. It just keeps recycling stuff over and over again and using those inputs. In the area of logistics and transportation, planes, trains, and automobiles and trucks, you have a lot of folks who have been slow adopters to this because they've got to worry about getting things precisely where they ought to be, exactly when they ought to be, in the right shape. So many things and variables that could go wrong. So for a lot of logistics professional supply chain leaders, the idea of adding green has been, I can't deal with this. We got so many things on our plate already. The companies that have, including FedEx and Staples and UPS and Walmart and so many other companies that have complex logistics operations, have found enormous savings here. And one of the simple measures that a lot of companies have taken with their trucks, they put these auxiliary power units on so that the trucks don't have to idle, because truckers, driving around 24 hours, they've got to actually sleep. So usually what would happen is they'd keep the engine running to keep the air conditioning on, keep the heating on in the summer and the winter time. And these auxiliary power units can save up like 20 gallons a day for a truck, which really, you can imagine, adds up to huge savings over time. A lot of companies are now getting into hybrid trucks, big upfront investment, huge payoff in the form of saved fuel, 40% better mileage, and also maintenance costs tend to be less for a lot of companies that are investing in this stuff. One of the examples I love from logistics is from Boeing. They actually were inspired by the sort of biomechanics of dragonflies and bats. And they ended up putting these winglets on a lot of the planes that have cut fuel use in the planes that use them by 3%, which may not sound like a lot. And that's the whole idea with sustainability. It's these little things that when you start adding them up, it's like compound interest. The numbers can be astounding when you start creating these little innovations that can lead to big changes. Another big area is packaging. I took this picture. It's probably one of the most egregious examples, but there have been so many where I get this box where something could have, they could have just mailed the box, put a sticker on the box. And what that leads to is a lot of trucks that are that could be filled much more efficiently. A lot of wasted gas, a lot of wasted fuel in airplanes and so forth, and a lot of wasted packaging that the consumer ends up and the customers end up having to deal with, which is a drag. Let me move now and sort of wrap up in talking a little bit about product innovation and some of the areas where companies are actually boosting revenues because they're innovating around the products. And start with a couple of examples of pioneers in this area. They're pretty well known. One is Zipcar. A lot of you may not think of Zipcar as a green play or a green company. I don't think that they sort of started that way either. But the idea, what they've basically done is taken a product and turned it into a service. And in the process of doing that, they've taken, for every car that they have, they've taken 15 to 20 cars off the road. And they're now boasting about that in terms of their green credentials, and they rightly so. But this concept of actually going from product to service is a really important one that's driving a lot of innovation. Similarly, Interface Carpet Company, many of you may have heard of it. If you haven't, there's a remarkable man named Ray Anderson, who's the CEO and founder of Interface Carpet Company. Kind of got religion many years ago when he read Paul Hawken's book, The Ecology of Commerce. Was running this industrial carpet company that was generating enormous amounts of toxics, waste, and so forth. And he was so inspired by the concepts there that he decided to really undertake a radical vision for his company and try to be have net zero impact by the year 2020. And that galvanized the company, much like the brewing company that I mentioned earlier, that people are really excited about that vision. The retention's been great. The branding has been fantastic. And they came up with this innovation that many of you may have seen, floor carpets, where you can actually buy carpet tiles. And that way you can, first of all, design a carpet to look exactly the way you want, which is pretty cool and is a new benefit for companies. But it also allows you to actually reduce the cost of maintenance, because you can recarpet very heavily trafficked areas and not have to buy a whole other carpet. Of course, reduce a huge amount of waste too. There's a company called, in the newer entrepreneurial space, Active Ion, that just last year developed something called the Ionator EXP, that Fortune said was going to be one of the top 10 disruptive technologies in the world. And it actually turns tap water into a chemical-free cleaning agent that kills almost 100% of germs. And there's a lot of demand for hospitals and businesses for these kinds of cleaning solutions. Even Valvoline is getting into the act with recycled motor oil. This is a really interesting example from a company called StoCorp in Vermont that was inspired by the lotus flower, which in Asian culture symbolizes purity because of its ability to remain clean while growing in a dirty environment. And what they managed to do was replicate the surface microstructure of the lotus plant leaf in paint, so that you never have to wash your buildings. The dirt just sort of washes off. A company named Akzo Nobel that you may know that does paints and performance coatings, specialized chemicals in Europe, now is focused on eco-premium solutions, sort of like GE's Eco-Imagination solutions. And that's generating a huge amount of profit for the company, higher margins for these products. They were inspired by the way that a lot of marine mammals move through water in a very sleek way, and they came up with this coating that allows ships to actually move through the water a lot faster, more efficiently, save the customer money, and they're getting a huge boost in profits from that. Another really interesting example is Clara. They've actually flipped the idea of cement on its head. They actually were inspired by coral reefs, the way that marine organisms actually develop their own shells and grow within a marine environment. So they developed a process where they take carbon dioxide out of industrial processes and they use that waste to actually make cement. And what's most interesting, I think, about the business model is it doesn't rely on selling cement. It relies on charging the polluters to actually to have the service of taking the carbon dioxide and sequestering the carbon dioxide. So free cement, but carbon negative cement, which in an industry like cement is huge because it's such a big contributor to carbon emissions. I just want to end with the statement that a lot of people ask me, is this green stuff a fad? And I've been working on this stuff for about 17 years now. I have felt for 17 years that it's not only not a fad, it's something that is going to be so powerfully part of everything that we think about and do, maybe not in our lifetimes, but fairly soon. And one of the reasons for that is that the fundamental drivers that are driving all this pressure from activists, from investors, from shareholders, from customers, from NGOs, all this pressure is rooted in some realities about what's going on with our natural world and our natural ecosystems. And I took this picture recently in Bahia a few weeks ago in Brazil. these trees kind of overtaking this natural structure that we had built. And I was thinking how, in fact, we tend to think about ecosystems again as this other thing, but in fact, these are these remarkable natural biological infrastructures that have been built through R&D over 4.5 billion years on this planet that do pretty amazing things. I mean, sort of when you stop and think about it, rain falls onto a virgin forest that's healthy, and out comes water that we can all drink, and that purifies our water. The lungs, the Amazon is known as the lungs of the planet because it breathes about 20% of the oxygen that we breathe on this planet. You have mangroves off the coast of Indonesia that are not only protecting, when they're healthy, protecting people against Katrina-like events or tsunamis, but they're also nursing 90% of the fish that we eat. So they're serving as the nurseries for that. And they're a huge amount of the solution for sequestering carbon in our atmosphere. We have all these systems that sort of work behind our backs that we all take for granted. And the reality, though, is that a lot of this has been free for us until recently. And what I think companies are just beginning to understand is that nature, in a sense, is going to start charging for all this stuff. And back in 1997, a bunch of economists did an estimate of if we had to pay for all this stuff, what is it that nature's giving us for free? And they came up with the figure of $33 trillion annually of free goods and services that we get. That's double the output of all the world's economies combined. And that number has been recently updated and is being updated and could be double at this point. But when you think about what it would cost us to build that infrastructure that nature's already got around, the answer is usually it would cost us a lot more. And we saw this in New York City here in the New York City watershed. For years, for decades, we've always talked about New York having the finest water in the world. You go to a restaurant and you say, I'll take New York's finest. Well, several years ago, about 15 years ago, that water started to degrade in quality. And the EPA basically came and said, New York City, you're going to have to build an $8 billion water treatment plant to safeguard people from this water that's unhealthy to drink. And some genius had the idea that, in fact, nature was doing this for a long time by itself, and maybe we ought to restore and fix the natural infrastructure that was already there rather than build this $8 billion plant. So for a fraction of the cost, New York City issued a bond issue. They paid, they changed land rights, they paid farmers, educated farmers to different practices. And instead of having to build a plant that would actually have millions of dollars of annual upkeep costs and have that upfront investment, for a small fraction of that, we ended up restoring the natural infrastructure. Now we still have clean water. This kind of story is being repeated around the world. But recently, what I'm excited about is that there are big companies and institutions. Price Waterhouse teamed up with Deutsche Bank and the UN and several other actors to create something called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Assessment recently. And one of the things that they concluded is that ecosystem threats are going to eclipse climate change in economic impacts, but they're still off the CEO's radar screen, evaluation's radar screen. They estimated that the current cost that we're doing in terms of global environmental damage is about $6.5 trillion in 2008, 11% of GDP. It's estimated to be $28 trillion in 2050, and that 3,000 public companies cause 1/3 of the damage. And if those big companies don't think that folks are going to actually put pressure on them to start accounting for that damage that so far has been sort of externalized, we call this externalities in economics, and it's an easy way of saying it sort of doesn't matter at the moment. But in fact, people are paying the cost indirectly. We're all paying the cost, and companies are eventually going to start paying the cost much more directly. And what this all means is that there's going to be more demands for transparency, more rating systems like we see countless sort of explosion of surveys like Corporate Responsibility Magazine rating companies based on all sorts of different criteria. We see more demands for radical transparency. Patagonia has been a pioneer doing its footprint chronicles and sort of allowing consumers to look at where a particular object that they bought was manufactured and followed the train all the way across the supply chain. And Walmart's actually starting to do this with barcodes on fish, on other products. You see companies like Walmart that are demanding for all of their suppliers, their billions of dollars worth of supply network, for answers about how they're doing, what their sustainability performance is, because they realize that it's all connected. More effort to try to make it easier for the consumer. This is not necessarily the answer, but the Carbon Trust has a label that it's worked on in the UK to sort of work with Tesco to actually put a carbon footprint label on every product so that consumers can differentiate. And it also means that there's going to be more regulation. And hopefully it's smart regulation that actually creates incentives and frameworks and gives private sector the flexibility to innovate and come up with the right answers at the right cost, and isn't just sort of command and control like we've seen in the past. But companies need to prepare for more regulation. And there's going to be more global competition in this area. We've seen in the areas of wind and solar, a lot of other high-tech, clean-tech areas where the U.S. was the catalyst and was the original innovator. A lot of those industries are becoming the global sort of leaders are in other countries, and that's just going to keep being an issue as we move forward. Why am I optimistic at the end of the day? People ask me if I'm optimistic or pessimistic about the sort of state of affairs here, and are companies doing enough? And first of all, I'm incredibly optimistic because I've seen countless examples, including Google, of companies that have really been visionary and created things that nobody could have even imagined in terms of solutions several years ago. But when you compare it to the scale of the issues that are causing all these fundamental drivers, it's nowhere near. The gap is just unfathomable. And so what we need, and what the companies that are sort of next practice in this area are thinking like Albert Einstein. We can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we have when we created them. We need totally new frameworks and fresh thinking. And so when I answer, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic when I meet people like you, when I know companies like Google, and I'm sort of reminded in a situation like this of the scene in an airplane where Leslie Nielsen keeps coming into the cockpit as the plane's coming down. He says, "I just want to let you all know we're all counting on you." That's sort of the way I feel about all of you, and I thank you for your time today, and I thank you in advance for all the great stuff you're going to do for the future. Thanks. Well, let me add just one other quick word, if I could. For those of you that are interested in keeping up with what companies are doing and sort of latest trends in corporate sustainability, we publish a free briefing every Monday morning that's just sort of no-nonsense, no advertising briefing that highlights a lot of the most notable plays that companies are doing, and government regulation and market technology trends and everything else. And you can sign up for it on our website, ecoforum.com. In the upper left, you'll see that sign up for free CF weekly briefing. And it sort of looks like that. And if you want to keep in touch with me, you can email me at any time. Look forward to meeting you guys afterwards, and follow me on Twitter.